what is your opinion about taking up the responsibility for the end-of-life phase of PV panels, inverters, and let's say the elements of a PV system? Do you support this idea? Do you find it reasonable in the year 2020, or do you say, no, guys, this is not what we want? So please shoot, and if some of you want to speak, you please do. We will just monitor a little bit the time and might then stop the discussion when it goes a bit too long and too far. Floor is yours. And I see in the meantime, myself, chats coming in. I see so far people supporting this and I would not say agreeing, but at least supporting it and also confirming that recycling concept is good. I also see questions, but that's more for the organizers then. Is there a recording of this webinar? And can the attendees get this?
Mr. Jan, can I suggest one thing? Actually, we have noted a couple of questions. So in the meantime, if nobody is answering this question, maybe you can answer a couple of those questions. I can share the screen right now itself.
But somebody wanted to raise some question, put hand, already 2 people. So maybe we can give the floor to these people.
All right. I think Mr. Dilip Kumar has already raised his hand. So Mr. Dilip, if you have any question, you can just unmute yourself and just state your question or suggestion, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yes, but Mrinal, can you be facilitator, please? It means that
yes.
Order to make some order with these questions and answers and keep time. And I can do this, but it'll be better if you do this.
Sure.
Okay, I'm muting my.
So, Mr. Dilip, yes.
Thank you, Jan. Thanks, everyone. I represent the company Repairer Works. We are one of the first comers in India to set up repair recycling company in solar specific. We have done about 30,000 modules repair. We are tied up with one of our partner in Europe for recycling, and I think Jan has clearly explained the challenges of recycling. I should salute Jan for clearly putting the difficulties that we have, and the major challenge that we have in recycling is they look at recyclers as waste paper collectors. So they say you have 16 modules which are broken, which are having challenge. This is the weight. You give me money and take the materials, which they really do not understand that we have to put money into recycle to take it. So that is the major change that we need to bring in. The other change that we need to bring in is some of the modules, when we talk about recycling, everybody looks at crushing the module, doing a pyrotechnic, and splitting the materials. But some of the modules, we can grade them and make it into lower grade of modules and can be resold. So this concept should also be coming into place. I really like the way that it has been put, the financing for end of life cycle, because without a finance option, PV recycling is going to be a really challenge, and there should be an incentive for the producers to really recycle. Voluntary model is not working for any recycling model, be it solar or anything else. This is what I want to submit.
Yeah, thank you, Dilip. Sorry, I intervene here. I saw also another guest.
Yes, I think Mr. Kartikeya would also like to say something. Yes, Mr. Kartikeya.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for this presentation. I think it's very important and timely that we take a initiative to address the end of life recycling challenges for solar PV, especially given the sudden glut of solar PV projects in India. That said, and forgive me if I missed anything in terms of the background, broader background, but I just had 2 or 3 questions, and of these, some of these are sort of in a form suggestions as well. One is in terms of this recycling framework that you're looking at, what instrument are you looking at? Because traditionally, for example, you even made reference to batteries and everything. Those have been issued as rules under the Environmental Protection Act. But this seems to be an MNRE brokered consultation. So I'm not sure what instrument, legal instrument, will be used to sort of capture this framework that we're contemplating. That's one. Two, in terms of the framework that you're contemplating, are we looking at any incentives or disincentives? In terms of disincentives, I'm looking at a broader sort of enforcement framework in terms of how it's proposed to ensure that these measures are followed. For background, I mean, as you may well know, traditionally under environmental laws, there's an NGT and there's a pollution control board, which is in a way in charge of ensuring compliance. And in terms of incentives, I mean, given that there are a raft of compliances, particularly in the environmental sector, and this would just be another one, is there anything that we can think of as a means of sort of like giving an added incentive for people to actually participate in this? And lastly, we noticed that the option that you've selected is that of a sort of an organization formed by the market participants themselves. This is, at least to my understanding, a bit of a departure from the norm in environmental legislation in India, because like I said, it's usually a government authority that is responsible for sort of like, acting as the linchpin for any sort of exercise like this. So just those thoughts and sort of a broader introduction. I'm Karthikeya. I'm a lawyer. I work with J. Sagar Associates.
Jan, I can take the first question and some parts of the second question because they are very much relevant to the Indian context. And then maybe you can take the incentives part and the organization part. When it comes to the first question, Mr. Karthikeya, that it is true, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change is the nodal agency for implementing any regulation, and the CPCB, the Central Pollution Control Board, will be the authority to sort of roll it out. This role, this partnership that has been formed is formed with MNRE, where MNRE will send these guidelines to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, because generally MOEFCC delegates the responsibility of different waste managements directly to the ministry under which, or the department under which these duly fall in. So this is the exercise that happens before something becomes a draft or something finally ends up becoming a policy. The second part here, which also answers the first half of your second question, is that when we talk about incentives, or when we talk about how to incentivize, I'm sure Jan will take you through what we have in our kitty, because what you are seeing is just on the market overview and how to structure it. But the report that we'll be submitting to the ministry will contain A to Z of the entire waste treatment in terms of the business models, in terms of the cost, in terms of the procedures and mechanism, so that it becomes like any other document that you see from the CPCB or MOEFCC. With this, I will hand over to Jan to answer the other parts of this question.
So I think the question left is only the legal entity. I understand. To this question, yeah, the objective is here that the solar industry, represented by companies active in the PV sector, are taking the lead to steer this organization. and this like mainly in this management organization, it's up to them to take the lead and to define the strategy and all the other main elements. So I hope this answers your question.
Maybe if you don't mind, I will add something. I believe that the discussion is not ended, and we are proposing one solution, but how it will be shaped by the government, we will see. This is just the beginning of conversation about introduction of PV recycling in India. So, for example, when we are talking about responsibility, we can say that if we impose, let's say, fee which would cover full cost of installation of 10 gigawatts, it would be like 150 million euros for recycling this amount of waste today. And who is going to be responsible for this waste in the future? Most probably the entire risk for the process is taken by the state, by the government. So if the government is responsible for this future waste, I believe that the government will try to share these risks and also try to play with the roles of different actors. So we are proposing some solution which works for Europe, and hopefully it would fit to Indian context, but first of all, it has to be really discussed with relevant stakeholders like the Ministry of Finance or Ministry of New and Renewable Energy.
Mirnal, I also see a question from Raghu Virdas. He would like to answer question 2. Would be interesting to hear Raghu Virdas answering question 2. Are you still there, Raghu?
Good afternoon, team. Am I audible?
Yeah, we hear you.
Thank you, Jan, for the pleasure of this meeting. So I'm a public policy researcher specializing in waste management, especially in India. And in my dissertation, I basically wanted to calculate how do you finance a recycling program for solar PV waste in India. What I figured was, if number one, if you were to create what do you call within the tender or the government auctions in India, we conduct large-scale reverse auctions where the government announces that they'll purchase 500 megawatts, 1 gigawatt or 2 gigawatts. If within the documents there is a clear explicit mention that the developer also needs to ensure end-of-life treatment through recycling, and a benchmark cost can be calculated. I calculated a benchmark cost, and it was for if the levelized cost of electricity was 8 rupees per unit of solar energy, the recycling cost came between 75 paisa to 99 paisa. This can be a benchmark cost. Obviously, if it is opened up to private players, they can drive down the cost. But compliance in India can be an issue. So a way around it is within the tender documents, a specific provision that recycling and end-of-life treatment needs to be done by the concerned party, that is the developer or the producer responsibility organization or whoever is assigned. Compliance can be baked in. So we've already done 35 gigawatts without any such end-of-life treatment specified. The rest, at least we can try and save the day by assigning a specific benchmark cost, which can be lowered through the market, and a legal requirement that the producer needs to ensure it's recycled, and the cost can be passed on to the consumers themselves. That is it. That is all from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Raghu.
I can also see Arjun Mehta's questions also. Maybe Mrinal, we can ask Mr. Arjun Mehta to talk.
Sure. Thank you, Subbu, for this. Hi, everyone. My name is Arjun Mehta. Thank you all for a lovely, a presentation and a talk on a very important subject, which is perhaps a niche in India at the moment, but I'm sure will pick up steam. I come from the solar power producer background, but I'm here in personal capacity, and I've spent some time in the e-waste recycling sector as well in the middle part of the previous decade. So obviously, a PV recycling concept is a natural extension of my own interests as well. Now I have three questions, and since I'm looking at the clock as well, I'll keep them very brief. So, Mr. Yan, I think a couple of these questions are for you, sir. Since as you know, with PV cycles experience in Europe, would you be able to tell us whose responsibility has it been in Europe at least to decommission the entire solar project? Considering a solar project is a lot more than just the modules. It is the steel, it is the module mounting structures, it is a balance of systems, it is the civil work, the concrete. I think someone else mentioned concrete as well as a part of some of the comments. So who decommissions the solar project to eventually bring the solar modules at the end of life to your recycling unit? So that's one question. The second question on a similar front as well, in India at least, the situation for the 35 or gigawatts of existing solar projects, and much of the pipeline to come over the next sort of tens of gigawatts would be in what we call the OPEX model or the independent power producer model. Now, in such a model, the consumer is not the owner of the plant, and the OEM then hands over the material or the equipment to the system integrator, who then has an EPC provider, who then has an independent power producer as the owner of the project. And then for the entire lifetime of the solar project itself, either in a residential sector or a large solar farm sector, the consumer consumes only as on a pay-as-you-go model. Now, in such a model where there are several different actors, how would we see the initial OEM be responsible for the end of life, since there are several actors between that value chain itself? And the third question is a very basic one. With the technological upgradation that we're seeing in terms of higher wattage modules, moving from 180, 200 watt peak modules, which were there in the early part of 2010s, the previous decade, to let's say even 500 watt peak modules or so, which are going to be in existence over the next 12 months. The per megawatt value, the dollar value of the material that can be extracted, I would imagine that to have reduced or fallen greatly. Especially when you're talking about glass being 78% of the components. Now the question over here is that with the technological upgradation in the photovoltaic modules, are we seeing a decline in the dollar value of extra materials to be extracted, which means that the entire commercial viability of recycling itself is under threat? Over to you, Mr. Yan. Thank you.
Yeah, very fast reaction on the questions. Who is responsible for decommissioning? Well, in general, in Europe, there is always another principle as well in the environmental legislation that the one who is generating the waste is responsible. So if you start to build, if you start to destruct a house or whatever, that's a, I'm not saying difficult question, but it's a basic question. Who is responsible for decommissioning? If you start to destroy your car yourself, well, yeah, you destroy it. So what EPR, what is extended producer responsibility, is adding on top of it is that for some parts, some equipment of the complete construction, you have a solution that you can maybe get rid of your waste for free or for a limited cost. And that could then be for the PV panels or the inverters or the batteries. But the rest of the things, yeah, if you have to restore the land, yeah, that's the responsibility of the owner of the land or the one who once installed the PV power plant. To come back to your second question, there I think this is all depending on what is the financing model. Is it a pay-as-you-throw model or a pay-as-you-put model? Depending on the answer there, you can just, then it follows this answer. And your last question, yes, a very interesting one. Yes, we see in general that the panels become much more efficient. And as we also saw with other products, and especially in the electronic business, the same products are still in place, but with less and less material or more and more efficient. So yes, it might have an impact on the recycling and mainly on the value of the materials. So yeah, in worst case scenario, it could be that the recycling, the treatment, will cost more money in the future due to the fact that we now have less and less silicon used or less and less silver used or all those nice materials. Yes, that could be a consequence of this.
Thank you, sir.
Mrinal and Marek, I think we can conclude it here. But before that, before I hand over to you, we will also be circulating these questions in written to all the attendees and to all the stakeholders to get more pointed inputs from your side, which can be incorporated into the final report that we'll be submitting to the ministry. Over to you, Marek.
Just one more thing, Marek, we have received a lot of questions in the chat box, and because of the less time we have, we were not able to address each and every one of them.
We would like to ask for even more. We need these questions as an heir. So please send us your questions, and we can also provide our email if it's not already known, and we are waiting for these questions. So we will prepare some report, and we will distribute also the questions to the participants. Each and every question is very much welcome. Maybe I will add one point. From our perspective, we can have impression that the PV recycling is kind of stand-alone policy. But I believe that if we are talking about PV recycling, we at the same time we are talking about eco-design and I would say improvement of the product, standardization, and so on and so on. And this eco-design, especially for Indian context, in my opinion, is quite important. Let me give you some example. Let's imagine that in some day there will be some cataclysm, some catastrophe, and some power plant will be destroyed. So I can imagine that the first thing which will be done, somebody will come to the place and remove wires and fire these wires just at the place of the solar power plant and sell copper. So if we can avoid, for example, PVC from the let's say materials, we can actually make the power plants, the PV power generation safer for environment. So I believe that maybe this is not so relevant for this discussion, but this is something which should be kept in mind when we are talking about waste management. And I don't want to have the last word. I believe that we already have such a honorable guest, like experts like you, especially for Jan, who is a CEO of PV Cycle, and he is one of the most important faces in Europe. I don't want to have last word. Jan, the floor is yours, of course.
Okay. Well, thank you, Marek. Thank you for all. Yeah, I become red here, but okay. Thank you for all this. I'm not claiming that I know all of it and all the answers. No, I can only say, due to my experience being in the waste business for 12, 13 years in the private sector, and now a PV Cycle, I understand, let's say, both sides, and I am familiar now after 11 years PV Cycle also with both sides. And as I said also in the slides, it's finding a good balance between ecology and economy, and that's what it's all about. But I'm glad to see, and that's maybe the conclusion, that a majority people who responded saying yes, this recycling, we need to have this in place. That's already a very good takeaway. And then with all the questions I saw and already the discussions we had, yes, if we would have set up this meeting for 3 hours, I think we would have still not enough time. So I thank you to all, and mainly to the organizers and to the TCP India, and to Marek and his team, and Subbu and Solar Power Europe to get this organized, and to see a large number of people attending. So that gives a very good feeling, and that's very important. And I hope we can now bring it to a next level. But let's first with Marek finalize the study and liaise then with the Ministry of Renewable Energy. So thank you from my side.
Thank you. This is the end.